So we're talking about the hustle and the hustle of independent filmmaking, and our guest at this time exemplifies hustle. She's a writer, a filmmaker, a pancreatic cancer survivor. Her feature film POWERBOMB is available on DVD and on demand as of April 14th. The self-professed love child of Chris Sarandon in Fright Night and Susan Sarandon in Hunger. Hailing from parts unknown, also known as Cleveland, Ohio, she is BJ Colangelo. BJ, thank you so much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for crediting me as being from parts unknown. That's fantastic.
I don't want to tip my hand early that I'm a lifelong wrestling fan.
Oh, perfect. Kindred spirits.
And Becky, you happen to have known BJ well before this, I believe.
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad we have BJ on, and as our first guest, too. I think BJ and I have known each other, at least through the internet, for over 10 years, way back when, you remember blogs were a big thing, and
oh, yeah,
the heyday. We both had our own horror blogs, and so I think that's how we first met, and then years down the road, we ended up meeting in person once. Hopefully, we'll meet again soon. But it's so awesome to now see how both of our lives and careers have unfolded. And I think when we first interacted, when you had your Day of the Woman blog, which, is that still up?
The blog is still up. I try to use it as kind of this little archive of me growing up on the internet, is the best way I've used it to describe of, look how far I've come.
Yeah, and in your case, at least, that's not something that's super embarrassing. Like, a lot of people I don't want my archive of growing up on the internet to be around. But I was always super impressed by your analysis and intellect and diving into horror films from a feminist perspective, even at a very young age. But now it's cool to be talking to you in this context on a podcast as a filmmaker.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And I must ask before we kind of get into the weeds with you, what was there a particular film or a story or novel or something that really gave you the bug for genre, for horror, for all of it?
So I've been fascinated by horror my entire life. My mom is really big into horror films, and my dad likes to scare people. He's a prankster, but he does not like to be scared. So my mom never had anyone to watch horror with her after she and my dad got married. So when I was born, I sort of became the de facto movie watching buddy. And the one that really kind of set it off for me was I was at a slumber party with some of the neighborhood kids, and we were watching Sleepaway Camp. Like, I also need to let it be known that my parents let me watch pretty much anything that I wanted, with the understanding that if I got too scared, I was not allowed to turn it off, because they knew my imagination would be 100 times worse than anything somebody could put on screen. And they would always talk with me afterwards about what I had watched. So my parents were really hands-on about talking to me about film and what it means. But we were watching Sleepaway Camp, and I noticed that everyone else in kind of my friend group was all getting scared by something different. Nobody was jumping at the same things. What was really scary for me was not scary for someone else. And that was the first kind of aha moment I had of like, oh, horror movies, it can be very powerful, and they can kind of control the people in the room that are watching it. And that's really interesting to me. And as I got older, I started becoming a little bit more aware of how horror was impacting me personally through personal events in my life. The same way that people are like, oh, when I'm in a bad mood, I watch this romantic comedy. It always makes me happy. And I kept finding myself drawn to horror, and I became obsessed with trying to figure out why. And, you know, that meant that the second I go to college and take one film class, of course, I have to start a blog.
Yeah, I can relate to that part of it quite a bit. One thing you said, BJ, that's really interesting to me is how kind of the variety of experiences throughout your life sort of influence the lens at which you look at film. And horror movies in particular are such a unique way of kind of channeling those really deep-rooted fears and anxieties and insecurities we have, and kind of the ugly stuff that we want to work out. And, you know, known you over the course of 10 years and seeing you fight like hell through a lot of different moments in your life. And, you know, you've been very open with about a lot of those experiences online, and kind of sharing. And being a pancreatic cancer survivor, an assault survivor, like, how do you think those experiences impact your filmmaking career? Do you think they make you a better filmmaker with a deeper perspective? Or, I mean, can you talk a little bit about how you see that intersecting with your creative life?
Sure. So the thing that I think is most important is that when I sort of laundry list all of the things that I've been through in my life, that I am very open about, and I'm open about it because I recognize that for some reason I have the perfect combination of nature and nurture where I have the emotional capacity to talk about trauma openly without it being, re-traumatizing for me, without it being something that I can't get through without crying. And I recognize that so many other people, that's just not how their body and minds process that sort of situation. And there's no right or wrong way to process. We all process differently. But because I can actually talk about it, I felt that it was sort of my duty to be open and be able to speak about it candidly, knowing how difficult it is for so many people to do the same. And I think my creativity has really been reflected in that. And I have really tried my hardest to incorporate the stories that I knew that I needed at that time, and trying to be another voice to provide that maybe for somebody else. A lot of what we talk about in POWERBOMB, the feature that I co-wrote and co-directed with Zach Showalter, on the surface, yeah, it's about professional wrestling. It's about fandom. It's about, blurring the lines between reality and fantasy. But a lot of that kind of extremist behavior from this number one fan is directly correlated to how people have treated me on the internet as a woman working in kind of a male-dominated field, and how people feel that they're entitled to me in that regard. In terms of, my pancreatic cancer surviving, the weekend before I went in for my first surgery, Zach and I shot a horror short film where all of the dialogue is pulled directly from interviews with serial killers. So people who have committed actual atrocities, and how we manipulated that language as a through line. And that was extremely therapeutic, because it was this feeling of, I might not wake up from these procedures and these major surgeries. I want to go out making something that's as terrifying on screen, or as thought-provoking and as nerve-wracking as everything that I'm feeling right now, because it felt cathartic, it felt therapeutic, and that's definitely where it intersects. Is I'm sort of using film as my own personal form of therapy.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, that's artists all throughout the ages have been using, whether it's painting or writing or filmmaking, to kind of exercise those demons. But it's a long road, right? And it doesn't happen overnight with one project.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, I have been writing about film, I guess, semi-professionally when I was 18. And, I had been 3 years into working through my trauma as an assault survivor. And I don't think I was really open about it until I was in my 20s. And that's when I finally said something about it publicly. And I think it was in response, I think, to Game of Thrones or something, of somebody complaining about it. And I was like, you know what? I think that there are more opinions that need to be discussed here, and there should be some nuance that we should talk about. And somebody finally was like, well, who makes you an authority on this? And I was like, well, I've been there. And immediately I realized that people took me a little bit more seriously, which is a shame. I shouldn't have to out myself for the things that I've been through for people to take me seriously, but there is a sense of validity in that, and there's a sense of power. And if I'm going to be granted that power, then I need to use it for good in any way that I can.
I'm just at a loss that you asked for nuance to the internet.
I know. What was I thinking? I still try. In my day job, I'm a social emotional educator, and the entire point of class is teaching empathy and trying to look at people as the whole person and not just their incidents. And that's not an easy thing to ask of people.
It's definitely not, especially for a generation that's raised on that type of callous internet anonymity. That's a whole rabbit hole we won't go down. We'll keep it to the filmmaking aspect. So you mentioned POWERBOMB and co-directing it. You could argue directing is actually just asking for a lot of things you will not possibly get, and then also making absurd decisions last second, and ones that will give you anxiety for years to come oftentimes. But I want to ask, what kind of compromises did you have to make to get POWERBOMB to the finish line?
So there was a lot of compromises, especially with a film that was on such a low budget as POWERBOMB was. We did successfully raise a little over $10,000 through Indiegogo to help kind of offset some of our budgetary costs, which was incredible. But in terms of compromise, I mean, right off the bat, we wrote POWERBOMB with a specific wrestler in mind. It's actually, for those who are familiar with WWE, it was written in mind with Raymond Rowe / Eric of the Viking Raiders, because he's a Cleveland boy. And, he was all on board. Everything was great. We were excited. And then we get a message of, hey, we have a really short window to shoot this. I just got signed on this big contract in Japan. And we're like, well, we can't shoot a movie in 2 weekends. That's impossible. So back to the drawing board. And when we realized that we had the availability of Matt Cross of, Lucha Underground, and he's one of the most seasoned independent wrestlers in the world. He's wrestled in like 28 countries, something just totally bananas. He's also Cleveland based, and he had the availability. He was, nursing an injury, and we had our guy, and we're like, okay, well, we have to go back and we need to rewrite the entire script to be centered around him, because Matt Cross and Ray Rowe are 2 different body types of wrestlers, 2 different wrestling styles. They're different ages. A lot of things are very different about them. So number one, had to compromise of making the script be the best that it can possibly be. But on top of that, I'm co-directing with another person. So it's not just requests that I want as a director. I also have to collaborate with another person to make sure that those needs and requests are something that he shares. And there was a lot of give and take. There are definite moments in the movie that I look at and I'm like, I wish I would have fought a little harder for that. And I'm sure that he could say the same about things that I, got my way on, so to speak. But I was very blessed in having Zach as my co-collaborator, because from a business standpoint, he and I had been working together at that point for 3-4 years. We had known each other as long as I've known Becky. He's also kind of from that blogging days. So we knew how to communicate with one another, and we would take the time to make sure that everyone's voice was being heard. And we'd analyze everything from a logistics standpoint, from a time standpoint, and making sure that if something was absolutely necessary, that it was within the realm of possibility. And occasionally that meant sacrificing a lot. I mean, we have a scene with fire. Would have loved to have had a flame bar. Would have loved to have that. Didn't get that. So instead, I have a fire baton, and we put that very close to a camera, and it works. It looks like a flame bar. No one's any wiser. There's a moment where we needed a child to set something on fire, and he didn't know how to work a lighter. Fortunately, I have very small hands. You do it close up, it's my hands, but you know what? You believe it's a 10-year-old boy that's doing it, and it's perfect. But these are all things that we sort of had to compromise on. It was either do we lose the shot or do we work around it? And I'm a big proponent on let's find a way to work around it. So we did as best as we could.
Right, and it's not like there's not 1,000 challenges in the low-budget filmmaking game, but would you say that losing Rowe and replacing him with Cross was actually the biggest challenge you faced on this one, or no?
I think that became a big blessing in disguise, because working with Matt he's one of the nicest people in the world. And Ray Rowe is also extremely nice. And I obviously didn't get to spend as much time with him as I did with Matt, so I'm a little biased. But that was definitely one of the biggest challenges. But if I'm being completely honest, writing a horror movie in the world of wrestling as a woman is very difficult, because people are garbage. And especially when it's on, an Indiegogo crowdfunding platform, people can make their voices very heard, very loudly. And they had my face and my contact information, and they could directly get in touch with me and tell me how they weren't going to give us money because I was a part of it. And if I'm a part of it, then it's, of course, going to suck because I'm a woman. And what could I possibly know about wrestling? And that was definitely the hardest part, was trying to sell this movie to wrestling fans and to horror fans as a woman. I think horror fans are pretty okay. I think I had earned enough clout in the industry after years of writing, but the internet wrestling community, not the easiest nut to crack.
This is true.
Yeah. And Sean's a big wrestling fan. It's funny because there's this huge intersection of horror fans and wrestling fans. And I don't know what it is about the horror genre, but it seems to attract a lot of wrestling fans, or wrestling fans attract horror fans, vice versa. However you look at the Venn diagram, but there's certainly a lot of crossover. So I feel like I'm somewhat connected to the wrestling world, just because most of my friends that are into horror that, I follow on social media are also super into wrestling. So I've learned so much about wrestling just, vicariously. But I know Sean's a fanboy. in that regard. So I'm sure.
I am. We'll nerd out after the fact. But no, I think to what Becky's point, there's also a huge intersection with comic book fans too. And I think it might just be, they're all versions of escapism with larger than life characters. And I think there's something to that escapism and nerdiness all kind of intersects naturally, because you're watching superheroes in wrestling the same way you're reading superheroes in comic books. And I mean, even right now, there's actually horror-based characters as big as in WWE right now. So I think it all plays to a similar kind of notion in people's minds.
And at the end of the day, I mean, you have to look at wrestling as becoming extremely popular during a pre-Marvel era, because I think that sort of skewed people's perspectives on like superheroes. But wrestling, comic books, horror, these are all considered sort of, bastard genres. They're the lowbrow genres that people look down upon. And I think that it's only natural that people who share one interest are going to probably fall in line with one of the other ones, because they're genres that are othered very frequently. And I think a lot of the people who like these films and comic books and sports entertainment, they are used to feeling othered, and this is a space where they belong.
No, that's a perfect segue to something I wanted to ask you. One of the reasons we actually started this podcast was in an effort to shine positive light on genre films, because there's still an uphill battle for it to be legitimized. If you guys don't believe me, just look how often people still say things like elevated horror.
Right.
Straight up genre movies, be they action, sci-fi, horror, just are not taken seriously enough. And per the mission statement of your original Indiegogo page, you did say Powerbomb was actually born somewhat out of that frustration with people not taking wrestling seriously.
Absolutely. And the thing that got me the most about Powerbomb was when we announced that we were casting actual wrestlers. People were completely up in arms. How could you do that? They're going to be terrible. Oh my God, they're so cheesy. And then Glow came out, and the standout from Glow is Kia Stevens, or as her character is the welfare queen, who's the only actual wrestler on that cast. And she's the one everyone's like, oh, she's amazing. Where did they find her? A wrestling ring, because wrestlers are cutting promos and acting every single time they enter. So yeah, they're performers and they're very talented. So people wrote off a lot of our cast members based on their jobs. But then at the same time, we're like blown away when like, oh my gosh, she's an incredible actress. Who would have guessed the wrestler could act? It's like anyone who's ever watched wrestling, because that's their job.
It's very true. And, one of the things too I was thinking about is you were talking about wrestling being kind of an enclave for those who have been othered or outsiders, people who feel different, is the idea of being very inclusive from a filmmaking perspective. One of the things that I found really cool about Powerbomb is that it also features Gregory Iron, and which is just so incredible. He's the only professional wrestler in the world with cerebral palsy. And, people talk about representation in film a lot, but they're often not talking about including those with disabilities. So I think it's really awesome that you guys thought to include, Gregory in the film as well. And I wanted to hear a little bit more about how that came about.
Sure. Greg Iron, the handicapped hero, as he is commonly referred to as, is a Cleveland boy, and he is a staple in our community, not just as a performer, but also as a philanthropist. And a lot of it does have to do with the fact that, yes, he does have cerebral palsy, and the way that his cerebral palsy has manifested is he does not have really any function with one of his arms. So everything that he does in the ring is completely modified. But the thing that I love the most about Greg is that while, yes, he is the handicapped hero and definitely plays into that from time to time, where he's, the ultimate underdog, so to speak, where he will have, one less arm and fight somebody 3 times his size. Greg is also not afraid to play a bad guy. And I think that that's the true representation. And that's the true equality of Greg Iron, is that he's not wanting to just be this, oh, we should feel bad for him. And of course he has to win. He has a disability. He's like, no, I want to be a jerk. I want to chew people out. I want to yell at kids. And I want to be the bad guy like everyone else. And I just happen to have, a disability. And Greg is also a massive, massive wrestling fan. Before he realized that he could be a wrestler with cerebral palsy, he wanted to be like a color commentator. And he didn't realize that you didn't have to have everything memorized to be a color commentator, as far as all of the history that gets brought up in matches, all of the names of moves. But Greg memorized everything. So he's become this sort of encyclopedia of wrestling knowledge. And with that, he's extremely gifted at choreographing and calling out matches. He's he's the best in the business. So we knew that we wanted him. We're like, we want to have Greg Iron. And in all honesty, his disability never really came into play as far as casting in his match in the show. Like, he's the heel that everyone's booing because Matt is obviously our face. He's the one that the audience needs to love. But Greg also worked as our stunt coordinator and our stunt supervisor. He trained everybody who was a non-wrestler in how to use proper stage combat techniques. There's a couple scenes where people jump off of furniture, and while you can't see it because it's off the screen, Greg's the one catching them and, you know, taking them safely to the ground on Max. He was incredible. And I'm extremely happy that we knew from the get-go it was going to be Greg, and there was no other option for us in our minds. And his disability, that's just part of who he is. But I don't think we ever really thought about it until after we shot everything and people kept bringing it up. They're like, oh my gosh, you have like a disabled wrestler. And I'm like, that's just Greg. that's just who he is.
I mean, I think that's kind of the point of representation, right? Is that so people can see kind of various iterations of themselves on screen as the protagonist, the antagonist, the bitchy best friend, whatever it might be. Right. So that they're more than just what people identify them as a result of kind of what makes them a minority status or a disenfranchised status, whatever it might be. I mean, I think that's really what true representation is, right? It's a disabled person who is often portrayed in one light in a film. Can be the villain. They can be powerful. They can do all those things as well. So I think it's kind of awesome that it never really factored into your decision to cast Greg.
Yeah, it really didn't. There is a moment where there's a scene where we gave a lot of room for improv between Greg, John Taddeo, also known as Super Cop Dick Justice. They were improving, and at one point somebody makes a wise crack at Greg, and he goes, hey, you can't talk to me like that. I'm an inspiration. And all of us just cracked up because we're like, yeah, that's Greg. Like, some people see him as like, oh, you're so inspiring. And at this point, he like kind of takes it, you know, a little bit as a joke, like, yeah, of course, he means so much to so many people. But at the same time, he's like, I'm so much more than just this. Like, I'm not just this, you know, oh, wow, what a great person, because he happens to wrestle while disabled. And we obviously had to keep the line in because it was just so gold. And it's exactly, I think, how so many people view him.
For non-wrestling fans out there, WWE had bought up all their competition around the millennium and have not had a lot of real competition since, until that is AEW, or All Elite Wrestling, kind of sprung up about a year and a half back. I wanted to ask you, now with the cable deal and primetime Wednesday nights on TNT, they're doing pretty well for themselves. Another co-star in your movie Powerbomb is Britt Baker, a current character on that show. Did or has the success of AEW actually helped you in promoting this film?
It has absolutely helped us because she's a household name. And what's amazing is that when we cast Britt, we weren't sure where she was headed because we shot Powerbomb over 3 years ago. So over 3 years ago, this is before she ever appeared in the Mae Young Classic with WWE. It's before AEW was ever a thing. She was just this very talented wrestler from Pittsburgh, which is, you know, close enough to Cleveland, who frequently wrestled at our local promotion. And we knew that we wanted to have a wrestler in the movie. Like, obviously we had to have our lead be a wrestler, but we really wanted the character. Her name is Kelsey Rocks, and she is a young wrestler who that was going to be her life. Everything was going to be wrestling. And then she has a career-ending injury very, very young. And that character is based very heavily on I am a retired world champion baton twirler, and the reason that I'm retired is because I had cancer and it like just wrecked everything, so I don't really perform anymore. And I at the time was dealing with a lot of issues surrounding that. So her character is very heavily inspired by that of, you know, you think you know what you're going to do for the rest of your life, and then you get hurt and it's not your choice, but you're done. Like, there's nothing you can do about it. And we knew that the only person who would truly understand that kind of pain is somebody who's a wrestler, especially somebody whose star was on the rise. So we cast Britt. She's incredible. Her performance is probably my favorite in the movie outside of like our two like main leads, Matt Cross and Wes Allen, who's an independent performer in his own right. But Britt Baker is fantastic. And, you know, her being on TV means that she gets second bill in all of the press releases. Right. And a lot of people really want to see this movie because they want to see her act outside of the character that they see her do every week, which is obviously just a hyper exaggeration of her meanest possible personality, because Britt is one of the most sincerely kind individuals I've ever had the pleasure of working with. She is the nicest person. And I mean, she was juggling our shooting schedule with independent wrestling, with dental school, with moving, because her boyfriend is Adam Cole, who's like the biggest deal in WWE's NXT right now. And she managed to make it all work and did it with a smile and was so excited to be there. And we're so lucky that we got her, not just because, yes, it's helping us with publicity, but because she's just genuinely a talented performer. And you'd think that people would actually believe it with how hard they push the fact that she's a dentist, but like she's legitimately a dentist. So very frequently, like when Quip, the podcast advertised toothbrushes, started being advertised, I was like, hey, is this worth anything? And she was like, no, get the Sonicare, put the money into it. I was like, all right, Quip, not Dr. Britt Baker approved.
I just bought a Quip. That's not a lie.
Throw it away.
I think I'm going to throw it away after that endorsement.
Especially in this time, hygiene's super important. I did want to talk a little bit more about your Indiegogo campaign, and I'm sure having some of these, like for Britt, A Star on the Rise attached to the film, and Matt Cross was, I would think, really helpful in the Indiegogo campaign. And though you did mention it also presented some challenges as well, with people either attacking you personally because you were a woman or questioning whether or not wrestlers could act. But I wanted to, on this podcast, we talk a bit about kind of all the ins and outs of filmmaking, how to get movies made, the struggles, all of that. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about like the financing angle and your experience overall and using Indiegogo and raising that additional $10,000, and then in general about how you approached financing at large for the film.
So the first thing, which was probably the biggest blessing, is that the wonderful people at Turnstile Films, who Yoshi Andrego was our director of photography, John Nix was our editor, the two of them agreed that if their production company could also be, above the line producing on the film, that they would put their hours of work kind of towards the budget. So rather than charging us to be a part of it, it would be something that would be, paid once, we sold the movie, if we ever sold a movie, but sort of we will get out what we put in, which was an absolute dream. And the people over at Turnstile are just incredible and so talented. And we were very, very fortunate to get to work with them. Another one of our producers is Matt Janacki, who most people know as a book publisher. He is behind 1984 Publishing, which does all of like Michael Gingold's Ad Nauseam books. He produced 24 by 36 alternative movie posters, published the alternative movie poster books. He's one of the producers on Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, and he's a Cleveland boy. And he and I actually got cancer treatment at the same time, at the same hospital. And it's just this very small world sort of thing where he met with us and agreed to come on board because he had not done a narrative feature yet. He's done a handful of documentaries and plenty of books, but he had not done a narrative feature. But he signed on with us, and a lot of it had to do with, wow, someone else in our community like wants to do something like this, do something fun and exciting. And we had so many mutual connections that we didn't even realize we had. And we live in the same city, and Cleveland's not a very big city, but Matt signed on and he became our executive producer. And he was, with him signing on, also brought some people realizing like, oh, we're serious, because he has, some serious projects under his belt and he's a pretty well-known guy. And that was really, really helpful. And I think kind of selling us to a lot of people. But the Indiegogo experience, crowdfunding is like a full-time job. And at the time I was working from home, so I was able to sort of manage all of that. But it was, we have to make sure that when we post about it, we're timing it right to make sure that people in Los Angeles are awake. And we have to make sure that we're also posting at night so people that are overseas can get it, because there's a huge overseas market for wrestling fans. And it was constant. And for the 30 plus days that we had that campaign up, that's all I could talk about. And it had to become my world, because, without that additional funding, we would have had to make even more compromises. And a lot of them would have been compromises that we didn't want to make, like safety. The astonishing thing is that we had all these wrestlers and we had insurance for them, and none of them have ever had insurance. They're like, wait, we get hurt and like we can go to the doctor. Like, we don't have to just walk this off. They're like, yeah, you can go to the doctor if you get hurt, but please, for the love of all that is holy, do not get hurt because I need you. But we weren't willing to compromise on those sorts of things. And, you know, when you are telling an insurance company you're shooting a movie about wrestling, those dollars go up. And we needed that extra funding. A huge chunk of that Indiegogo money went towards insurance, if I'm being completely honest, because we wanted to keep people safe. And we wanted to make sure that we could do things the right way and not have to sacrifice quality in favor of someone's health.
BJ, it's like you were anticipating our next questions.
I just talk a lot.
But that's good. It's way better than having a guest that doesn't talk. That's the worst.
Right. One-word answers. Matt was good. Britt was nice. It was fun.
Yeah, I teach K through 8, so sometimes it'll be like, how are you feeling today? Good. Great. I can't do anything with that. Perfect.
Yeah, exactly. When I ask Gwen how her day at school was, that's usually what I get is fine. Okay. What'd you do? Nothing. Did you learn anything? No.
My favorite response is to say, how are we doing today, class? Good. Are we actually good? Or is that what we're saying? So I stop asking you questions.
That one.
Yeah.
So speaking of questions, we're going to hit you with a little bit of a rapid fire ones in that we just don't want you to think too hard about it. Just kind of give us the first thing that comes to your head. They're just sort of pop culture and tailored to some wrestling questions I threw in here as well, if you're good with it.
Oh, fantastic.
All right. We will get started. Becky, what do we call this segment?
The Rapid Fire 15.
Okay, then that's what jingle coming soon. Rapid Fire. Cue the tense game show music.
There we go.
All right. Number 1, what movie do you think you've seen the most in your life?
Fright Night, 1985's.
Good answer.
What is your favorite horror movie franchise?
My favorite horror movie franchise is actually the Final Destination franchise because it was the first one that I discovered on my own. Everything else was introduced to me by my mom, and this was kind of like, this was my franchise.
Nice.
That's a good choice.
Right?
I love those movies.
I think they're completely underrated, and only one of them is bad. And those are better percentages than every other franchise.
This is true.
I can't argue that. What is your favorite Universal monster movie?
Dracula's Daughter, which always gets left out of the equation because it's very gay.
All right. What is your favorite John Carpenter movie?
The Thing, because it's a perfect film, and that's probably the Carpenter film that I've seen the most. I don't even consider, I think Halloween's like its own entity at this point, but I've seen The Thing. I probably watch it once a month.
Nice. And no argument from this group either.
No. I have a Thing poster right behind me as we speak, so.
I'm obsessed with The Thing, and actually one of my first death threat articles that I was ever sent over was I made an argument that the titular Thing is a female. And that my arguments being that its blood is not the same as other blood, the same way that women can bleed. Some women can bleed for 7 days without dying. It also can absorb something and create an exact copy, the same way that we can with childbirth. And female intrusion on male relationships tends to cause hostility. The only time we see really any hostility is when the Thing arrives, and also when McCready's playing computer chess, which has a female voice.
Ooh.
Awesome.
Can you send me this article? I want to read it.
Yes, I can. And the comments on it are as to be expected.
What would you say is your favorite mainstream wrestling movie or movie about wrestling?
Right now, I am really into Fighting with My Family, Paige's story. I know that it's recent, so that seems kind of like a cop-out of that's just the most recent one you've seen. But it's really fucking good.
And a great window into for non-fans. I've shown that movie to a couple people. Everybody, it has heart to it, and it does work.
I agree. And it has Florence Pugh in it, who is, kind of the darling right now of indie cinema. And it's no, look, she's perfect. She can wrestle.
Right.
I still need to check it out, and I want to watch it with my daughter so that we can kind of be all fighty together.
I think Gwen will like it a lot. Gwen will immediately want to jump off furniture more than probably Charity does.
Yeah, maybe I don't want to watch it with her. Who would you say is your favorite film director?
John Waters is my favorite film director of all time, without question. I love a filmmaker who does exactly what they want, the way they want it, how they want it in the time that they want it to exist. And no one really gets to do that anymore, but John Waters does.
What would you say your dream film project to direct would be, like, assuming budget, story rights, etc. would not be a concern?
I guess this is also kind of a cop-out. I really want to remake Dracula's Daughter and make it canonically gay. Like, now that Blumhouse is doing all of their Universal Monster reboots, I just, like, want to be at a position in, like, 3 years, maybe, where I get to remake Dracula's Daughter, and it's not this coded, Hays Code bullshit, where it's like, no, she's gay. She's real gay. This is Carmilla, and we're not being shy about it. That's what I want.
Okay, what was your best concert experience?
My best concert experience, I saw Kiss during their Kiss Alive 35 tour with my parents and my little sister. And my little sister at the time was a young teenager who she wanted to be anywhere in the world other than with her family screaming to Kiss music at like a summer fest in Milwaukee. So an outdoor amphitheater. So everyone's sweaty and it just reeks of weed and BO and Miller Lite. And I had the time of my life. My parents are big, like, rocker people. My dad's super into hair metal. My mom's license plate used to be Jovi Fan 1. Like, they are big into, like, concerts. So we were screaming and, like, losing our minds. I was, I think, 18 at the time, 18, 19. I definitely could not legally drink. That does not mean I didn't do it, but I was not old enough to, and I had a blast.
Good story.
I unironically love Kiss, and my future wife has my favorite description of it, which is Kiss is the hibachi grill of musics, in that you're not there for the quality, you're there for the show.
Right.
Fair enough.
What fandom would you say you're most ingrained in or identify with or obsessed with even? It can be broad or very niche.
I think the fandom that I'm probably the most, like, ingrained in at this point is probably the queer horror community. Sort of the Attack of the Queer Wolf, the Fangoria podcast. I'm the moderator of their Facebook group, and I'm one of the talking heads in the Shudder queer horror doc that's coming out later this year, directed by Sam Weinman. And the people that I've really met within that community, I feel like I've really found my second family with them. And I think I text members of, kind of that community probably as much, if not more, than I do my own blood relatives at this point.
Right, so transitioning to your other fandom, I wasn't sure if you were going to say wrestling or you're going to say something involving the horror community or something else entirely. But so back to wrestling. What is your earliest wrestling memory? Or the first live wrestling show that you attended?
So my earliest wrestling memory, I've actually written about a few times, is Halloween Havoc with my dad. My dad's a big wrestling fan. And my dad is also a huge Ric Flair guy. Like, that's his dude. And because of that, Ric Flair has sort of become one of, like, he's in my my Mount Rushmore of wrestling. And I was watching Halloween Havoc with my dad, and Mr. T is the guest referee, so, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And it was a, like, loser leaves match, and Ric Flair lost. And I have never seen a man so heartbroken than watching my dad just, like, crumble into pieces over a wrestling match. And I was like, wow, sports are intense. And that was one of my moments that, like, I will never forget that. As far as earliest wrestling show, I actually didn't get to see a live show until a lot later in life, because I fell out of wrestling during the time that a lot of people cite when they got into wrestling. We call it, like, the Attitude Era, because the Attitude Era, while was great because it gave us things like The Rock and Stone Cold, it was a really shitty time for women's wrestling. And that's when we have, like, bra and panty matches and the Playboy, like, gown lingerie matches. And there's just a lot of misogyny, a lot of sexism. And even as a really young kid was like, I don't like this. Like, I feel very uncomfortable, but I didn't obviously have the language yet for why I felt uncomfortable. So I sort of fell off of it, and I didn't get back into it until I got sick. My nephew caught the wrestling bug because YouTube existed, and he was able to look up matches on YouTube of indie wrestling, and he got me back into it with a match, the iconic PWG Pro Wrestling Guerrilla match between the world's cutest tag team, Candice LeRae and Joey Ryan, versus the Young Bucks, where Candice takes a shoe cleat with thumbtacks to the face and is covered in blood and gets up and still wins the match. And I was like, damn. I was like, women are tough as hell in wrestling now. I'm back in. You got me.
Right. And Becky, for the record, she's talking about like a 5'2" blonde, bubbly lady who you would never think would be the one to take a move like that to the face.
She used to sell cupcakes and gingerbread cookies at her merch booth. Like, she is pure sunshine. I love her very much. She's incredible.
You kind of mentioned Flair's in your Mount Rushmore. He should be in everybody's Mount Rushmore. But I want to know, though, do you have an all-time favorite match, or was it the one that got you back in if it's not that one?
In all honesty, it's the one that got me back in. Is kind of my all-time favorite match. It just hits me on so many levels of it reignited what I loved about wrestling as a kid, but then also kind of catered to my interests now as an adult who's a little bit more socially conscious. And it was the first time that I really felt, I guess, seen in a wrestling match. But I will say anything with Mr. Chris Jericho kind of ranks above everything else because Chris Jericho is my GOAT. I have a collection of wrestling figures in my room, and I have an entire shelf solely dedicated to how many Chris Jerichos I have. For my birthday one year, one of my friends made me rosary beads with a Chris Jericho rosary set at the end of it. So it's like a little man wearing a sequined jacket and a ceramic list of Jericho at the bottom of these rosary beads.
Very nice.
It sounds so ridiculous.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. I was like, that sounds so ridiculous, yet so perfect.
I love Chris Jericho.
I will not judge. Neither will the lady on the other end of the line here with the Jason Statham necklace. So we will not cast aspersions about your trinkets.
All right, now for something completely different.
Okay.
Who is your favorite Disney movie villain?
Ooh. So my brain immediately wanted to like scream like Ursula because I love Ursula from The Little Mermaid because she's based on Divine and she's fat, and those are two things that I love. But I think that Mother Gothel from Tangled is an awful human being because she is willingly harming somebody and traumatizing them for years and has zero remorse about it and is gaslighty, and her ways of being shitty are far too relatable because they don't feel like magic. They feel way too real, and I think she's evil and terrible, and yet I love singing her songs.
Mother knows best. That's a good call. I have a 4-year-old who's a fan of Tangled, so I know those songs incredibly well.
Yes, I used to get paid to sing Mother Gothel songs because it's in my range of character voices. Because my degree is also musical theater, so I'm also a huge dork in that regard, too.
Right. What would be your walk-on music? And I don't feel like I need to explain that to a wrestling fan. What would be your entrance music?
My entrance music would be the song Naked by Planet Booty. If you have not gotten on the Planet Booty train, you are missing out. They are so much fun, and their music is inclusive, and the beats are amazing, and they come out and have a giant disco balled ass, so they're great.
Okay, I just wrote down on a note on a piece of paper by my computer, Naked by Planet Booty, just so that I can look it up, but I really want someone to walk by and read that and ask me all sorts of questions.
They're on Spotify. It'll be perfect.
Great. Okay, so Star Wars question time.
Oh.
On a scale of mixed bag to piece of crap, how bad did you think The Rise of Skywalker was?
I hated The Rise of Skywalker. Hated it. I actually tweeted about this like 2 days ago. An ex-boyfriend that I had 10 years ago blocked me on Twitter because I said that I hated The Rise of Skywalker. It's like, you're dramatic, number one. But I just sat there and I was like, I didn't like that. And then when I went home and I sat and I thought about it, I was like, no, I really didn't like that. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. Wait, I hate this movie.
Well, maybe it was a blessing in disguise that he blocked you.
It absolutely was.
That was, these were tailored to you, but that was certainly me projecting, sorry, in that question. Because I feel
totally
like you
fine.
felt I was old enough to survive the prequels, and we all felt that way too. We walked out of Phantom Menace like, how cool to see new Star Wars, and an hour later we're like, but what about? And then by the end of the night we're like, what the fuck?
Yeah, my future wife is the lead bartender at a nerd bar. It's called The Side Quest. Like, it's a nerd bar. Mm-hmm. And there was like a staunch rule of like, you do not talk about this Star Wars movie when she's working, because she also hates it. And she's like, I will lose my job. I will jump this bar and fight someone if they try to tell me otherwise. This movie sucks.
I don't know that I share the extreme feelings, but yeah, I'm probably more in the mixed bag leaning towards piece of crap camp. But I'm not a big Star Wars fan in general, so like I don't get as upset. I'm coming in it with no preconceived notions about it being great, so
I wish more people could walk into it that way, because it has always been a mixed bag at best. And finally, BJ, what is the very first restaurant that you will go sit down and eat at once all this social distancing and quarantining is behind us?
Oh, okay. So I have a real answer and then I have a knee-jerk answer. My real answer is we have a really incredible taco place, like walking distance from where I live, called Blue Habanero, and they do Mexican street tacos, and they're authentic and incredible, and I can eat 7,000 of them, and I really want to go very badly. But my knee jerk is that my trash brain was like Applebee's, because I'm a garbage person who willingly goes to Applebee's.
I'll take the tacos. I'll eat 9,001 tacos.
Is that due to limited options of non-chain restaurants in your area, or are you truly just a garbage person?
So I go out of my way to eat Applebee's because it's not near me, because I live in an arts district. So I have like all these artists and amazing restaurants around me. But growing up, I grew up very poor, and like going to Applebee's was like, we're balling out tonight. We're going to the bees. Are you kidding? So it has like this weird sense of nostalgia where it is like the ultimate comfort food for me, because I immediately turn into a 12-year-old again, where it's like, oh my God, you got an A+ in your report card. We're going to Applebee's tonight. Or like, you got first in the science fair. Applebee's it is. So it just makes me immediately feel validated, even though I'm fully aware that it's bullshit.
We won't judge and clown it in that case, because we all know nostalgia is a hell of a drug, and we all have our own things we'll do like that too.
Yeah. Plus, we all have a certain chain restaurant, maybe multiple chain restaurants that we fucking love, regardless.
Multiple,
like, I love Chili's. That's like my equivalent of Applebee's. I also love
Chili's.
Oh, so good.
There's just something that's weirdly comforting, and also because it is a chain restaurant, I could be anywhere in the country, and if I feel like I'm lost or if I feel like unsure, like I can just go to Applebee's, have an Oriental chicken salad, and be on my way.
Yep. I mean, I get it. Sometimes you want something that you know exactly like how it will taste. It will be comforting to you. You're not always in the mood to experiment or try something different. Like I know when I was pregnant with Gwen and I was going through morning sickness, I also happened to be traveling internationally. And you bet your ass that I went to McDonald's and got chicken nuggets, because I wanted to know exactly what it was going to taste like, because otherwise I was afraid I was going to throw it up. So,
yeah. See, and that's exactly where that love of Applebee's is, because it's always familiar.
Yep. But you know what? Sometimes you just want a little taste of home, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly. That's how I like to see it.
Well, thank you for answering all of those with some pretty solid answers. I don't think there was a dud in the bunch there. That's it for the rapid fire aspect. I do have a couple more things before we let you go. Just every single female filmmaker I know has at least a horror story or 10 about being dismissed immediately from folks. And you've kind of alluded to a few before. Do you have a particular anecdote of just being told, no, you don't look like a director, or no, we don't deal with non-white guys in flannel?
And beards.
Oh, God, the beard and the flannel. My God. So a big one is that because our film is co-directed, and Zach and I have co-directed multiple times, and I have a gender-neutral name, when we send correspondence for like festivals through email, a lot of times they either don't recognize that I'm a woman, or they assume that Zach did something by himself. And I have a short film that I directed by myself called Labyrinth that's kind of doing festivals right now. And it is being submitted around the same time as a piece that Zach and I, we co-directed a segment for the horror anthology Deathstember. So they're seeing my name come up multiple times, one for a short and then also as part of this feature. And I can't tell you how many festival directors would just email Zach asking for him about things, even though my name was there twice, or would contact both of us, talking to us as if we're both men, not recognizing that I'm a woman. We had a festival director that's like, oh, I see that you submitted this film for like the female director category. Was that an accident? And I'm like, no, it's not an accident. And they're like, oh, okay. So that's been fun. But there was a fun one actually, like when we were shooting POWERBOMB, there was like a building, not a building inspector, but like the person who was letting us into one of the buildings to shoot, kept asking for the director. And I was like, that's me. And they're like, no, the other guy. And I was like,
Oh no.
no, that the director is me, and the other director who you've met, who you already let inside, like it's a co-directing project. And they're like, oh no, I was looking for BJ. And I was like, yeah, again, that's me. My name is Brittany Jade. Yeah, that's what it stands for. It's not like Billy Joe or something. And this guy just like wouldn't handle it until finally like one of the actors came by and had to be like, yeah, no, she's the director. And you're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't understand that there were two, and I just thought that it was just the one guy. And I'm like, no, it's not. So it's been more a lot of convincing people of who I am than anything, which is incredibly frustrating. But having directed so many things with another person, like now that I'm directing on my own, that's been difficult, as they see like the picture of the two of us as a pair, and then when they see the solo directing project, they assume that it's the male part of that pair that is now branched out on their own. And I'm like, no, it's me.
Do better, man.
It's frustrating because you don't really realize until you maybe work on a project like that with another man. I've done some co-directing with a male director as well, where you see in a very real way the assumed competence that males get that's not afforded to females.
Yes.
And it's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, I have to justify. We worked on another project, and I ended up being the only woman on it. And the amount of, I don't want to say research, but I had to go into every conversation already preparing for what I knew they were going to throw back at me and address it first before I even gave them a chance to question what I had to say. So there's like a lot of studies about women who use like the word just a lot. Like, I just wanted to say, and it comes from this sense of like feeling like we have to apologize because we know going into it, we're like, people are already frustrated that we're even doing it. So it would be, say they wanted to like make the car blue or whatever. And it's like, so I know that you want to make the car blue, but I really think that it should be red. And here are the reasons why it should be red. And while I know your argument for blue might be because of this, this, and this, I think that red is the better option because of this, this, and this. Like that, like I had to talk my ass off just to like make one statement of like, no, but the car should be red. Like something, obviously it was dealing with things a lot more intense than something that trivial, but every situation I had to be 3 times as armed with information, whereas like a guy would be like, well, I just like blue and it should just be blue. I'm like, fuck me. Okay.
Exactly. Have to work 3 times as hard. Speaking of working 3 times as hard, I know that you're not taking a break right now. So can you share anything that you're working on next with us?
Sure, I can. So, like I mentioned, I have Labrys, which is in festivals right now. Those that are still running because the world is on fire. As is Zach and I's segment in December. That's also going for the time being. But I do have some projects that are currently in pre-production. I have a really cool new queer horror short that's in pre-production that I'm really excited about. And then I also have a feature that I've written that is currently making the rounds right now, which I'm very excited about, and that's the one that I'm kind of really pushing for, but obviously that won't be seen for some time, but lots of things in pre-production, so definitely we'll have something on the festival circuit for next year, which hopefully there will be a festival circuit next year.
You and me both. I just wrapped up a short film and getting ready to submit it, and now I'm like, wait, is there a point in submitting things right now?
Right. I have I'm waiting to hear back on 2 festivals with Labrys, and if those festivals cancel this year, I'm just going to release it online for people to see because why bother,
Yeah. Well, we all have the world will probably look a little bit different in 3 months, 6 months from now, and I guess we'll just have to take it as it comes.
Yeah, we'll see.
Right. Again, though, like you said, the hustle never ends. It's only gotten tougher, as we've talked about on the show. BJ, thank you so very much for joining us. This has been a joy.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
I want to remind people that her film Powerbomb is available on demand and on DVD as of April 14th. And is there anywhere people can find you on social media that you'd like them to connect with you?
Sure, Twitter and Instagram. It's just my name at BJ Colangelo, Colangelo. Don't add me on Facebook because it's weird, but Twitter and Instagram are fair game.
Awesome. Thank you so much, BJ. It was so awesome to chat with you. Looking forward to seeing Powerbomb unleashed on the world, and excited to see what you have coming out next.
Well, thank you. I'm excited for you all to see it too.
All right. Thanks, BJ.
Thank you. Bye.